So recently, my wife and I got back from a short stay at a cabin in the woods. It was fun, but we didn't encounter any wendigos or skinwalkers or anything of the sort. Arguably, the scariest thing I saw while we were out there was a gray squirrel that was stealing some birdseed and challenging me for dominance at the sliding glass balcony door. God help us all if that door hadn't been closed. Anyway, here are some actually scary and allegedly true cabin-in-the-woods horror stories to give you nightmares for weeks on end. The first story today is a mind trip that will have you wondering if it really happened or if it was just the narrator's hallucination. Either way, the situation is creepy. So instead of a cabin for your next relaxing getaway, how about you buy a new beanbag and some cheesecake? Now, let's begin. This is an email from one of my friends. We'll call her Abigail. I received this back after sending her an email asking if she wanted to go up to my family's cabin for a week this past summer. Here goes. James, I'm really sorry. I know I promised this year would be the one that I finally went with you to the cabin. You've told me again and again that it'll be safe. There are other people there, but I just don't feel up to it. Next year, maybe, if we're all together. We could go to my parents' place even. Maybe go skiing. Colorado has some nice mountains. Who am I kidding? I guess if I'm going to blow you off for the third year in a row, you might as well know why. Do you remember 4 years ago? You probably don't. Well, you asked me the same question. But my parents had already planned on going up to the cabin that year since my dad was finally off of work. Anyway, I went up there with them. It was good. Fun, I guess. At least I got to spend time with them. I'm rambling again, sorry. The point is, I've not been honest with you, or with anyone for that matter. One night when my parents were all asleep, I went out into the woods on one of the trails. You know the system that runs back behind my parents' cabin, don't you? Well, I kind of got lost. It wasn't the smartest move, but you know how my insomnia is. I just felt claustrophobic cooped up in that cabin. Well, I was lost thoroughly. There was no signal up in Colorado where my parents' cabin was, so I had no idea what to do. I just kept walking down the trail. I guess I hoped that it was one of the routes that led down to the town, and not one of the ways to the backside of the mountain. I walked for half an hour at least, and I didn't get anywhere. Most of it was uphill, and the trail kept getting rockier. I think that's why I decided to turn around and take a different route when I reached one of the small ponds. You know, you can never be quite sure with those ponds. They all look the same. As I was turning around, I caught a glimpse of some light through the trees. A yellow kind of light, like you would see from a lamp. Not the glaring white ones that they line the water towers with, though I guess a water tower would have helped too. I walked over to it, thinking I could ask for some help, and as I entered the small clearing with the house, it was a small house with an oak wood frame. I saw the lights were on, and the door was open. But there wasn't anyone there, if you can believe it. I figured that whoever owned the cabin just went out into the forest for a minute. They would probably be back soon. I don't know why I decided to wait inside the cabin instead of outside, but can you blame me? It gets really cold at night in Colorado. I walked into the house. A rich person definitely owned it. It had all the bells and whistles, a nice stove, refrigerator, the biggest flat screen I'd ever seen. I sat down on the couch. I don't think I even waited 2 minutes before a young man walked back in. He was wearing casual clothes, a blue hoodie, if I remember correctly, and jeans. He looked surprised to see me there. I asked him if he knew the way back to town, or if he could at least help me get back to my parents' cabin. He ignored my question at first, the nerve, and said, "Darling, you look cold. Let me get you a drink and a blanket first." Now there was something seriously off about the dude. I can't quite place my finger on it, but it was something about the way he walked and moved his arms. It just looked jerky and weird, but his face looked fine, I guess, except it was too long and too smooth, and he would never look me in the eyes. He got back with the tea and a map, which I thought was the sweetest thing. He said he would be in the other room to get a blanket for me, and then he just, stood there watching me. It was really creepy. I didn't trust the tea then. I was in the middle of the forest at some stranger's house, and a funky-looking stranger on top of that. I was seriously freaked out, and I began to think, he's not going to leave until I drink some tea, is he? So I planned on drinking it and then getting the heck out of there. I took one sip, and it tasted bitter as heck, but he was already walking away, seemingly satisfied. I don't remember much after that, but I do remember trying to stand and run. I don't even think I made it to the door before I collapsed. This part's where it gets weirder. I woke up in his cabin sometime later. It was dark inside, and I had to kind of fumble my way around until I found the coffee table. It was dark, pitch black, but I could still see a bit, somehow. I really don't know how to describe this to you, but I think it was coming through the windows. The wall by the windows was just lighter than the rest of the room, but it was even darker outside than it was inside. I went up to the window and pressed my hand against the glass. The glass was hot like the sidewalk during the summer. I thought I'd burned myself, but it didn't hurt, and it didn't even feel warm. It's hard to explain, but I could just tell it was hot. Then I heard someone scream behind me. It was this little girl. She looked like she was only 11. I think that was when I realized that there was something seriously wrong here. There were 8 of us in the cabin. It took the rest of them about an hour to wake up, and when they did, it was silent. Nobody wanted to talk. I think all of us, being strangers in an even stranger cabin, we were all just confused at first. I decided there was no use in just standing around, so I got up and I told them I was going to do some exploring. It was definitely the same cabin, but something was off. Save for the living room and kitchen, all the other doors were missing. There weren't any lights either. I was looking around in the kitchen drawers, I think, and another weird thing was there wasn't anything in them. That's when I heard the door slam open. I turned around, surprised, expecting to see the strange man come in, but it was one of the men I had awakened with. He was just standing there in front of the open door. There was some kind of black goop behind it, but it appeared like it was swimming almost, but it wasn't making waves. It looked like it was folding in on itself, and every time it did, I caught a glint of light. It was like a soft blue, but it wasn't any color I can describe, at least not any color I've seen before. He just stood there, staring into the goop. He kept inching towards it like he wanted to jump in it, but something was holding him back. Joey, one of the girls, Michelle, I think her name was, said to him, "What are you doing?" The man didn't respond. He didn't even look at her. He just kept inching towards the door. Then the goop stretched, or more like it bulged, and part of it caught around the waist of the man. He looked at the girl for a second like he had broken out of a spell. He looked terrified, but the goop just yanked him into itself with a hiss, like water hitting a burning hot pan. The younger girl began to scream. Do you have any idea how awful an 11-year-old scream is? Anyway, I slammed the door shut and pulled the girl down onto the floor with the others. What was that? Michelle asked. Where did he go? I was dumbfounded. I think we all were, and terrified. We started discussing what we saw, how that man had been absorbed or dissolved into the goop. I kept glancing back at the door, expecting to see Joey burst through it at any moment. One of the girls pulled out her phone and tried to call the police, but again there was no signal. Another one of the girls got up and moved around, trying to find a landline. I stayed on the ground with the little girl and a few of the other people. There was something weird about Michelle. She hadn't looked at any of us once the entire time we'd been talking. She just kept staring out the window. Curious, I started to look too. I don't think the goop was actually moving, but it appeared to be pulsing or breathing. It was pressing up against the windows and then back and up against the windows again. Michelle rose to her feet and started to the door, and somehow that broke me out of my trance. I caught her sleeve as she passed. I was confused about how she could even go over there after what had happened to the boy. Where are you going? I asked. Then she hit me. I let her go then. All I could do was watch as she opened the door, and that mass stretched to take her too. We waited for hours. I don't remember how any of us were left at that point. It was alluring. I felt drawn to it. I don't know why, but I had the urge to just stare at it, to let it swallow me up too. I think we all felt it. At one point I was holding the little girl, and I caught her staring out the window at the blackness. I didn't know what to do. so I tried to cover her eyes. She started to scream and kick at me, asking me why I wouldn't let her look. Somehow she got my hand in her mouth and bit down hard. I think I remember she drew blood, but it just kind of floated there in the air, like the videos of astronauts drinking orange juice on the International Space Station. She was already on her way to the door, running, and I ran after her. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't made it to her in time. I had her pinned against the wall, and she was kicking and screaming, and someone else, one of the others, just walked by and opened the door, and the goop took them. The little girl and I just stared in shock. It felt as if a wave of heat pushed against us, when the girl at the door sizzled out of existence, like someone had pointed a stream of hot air towards us. I dragged the little girl back into the center of the room, and we sat again, waiting. I don't know what for. I just knew that doing anything else could kill any of us. Nothing happened for hours. I must have been in the cabin for days, though. I never got hungry or thirsty, and I never had to use the bathroom. We tried to play games to pass the time, but you can only play Go Fish so many times. The cabin had practically nothing in it now. Furniture, sure, but no books or games. The fridge was empty, and the TV was not on the wall anymore. I tried tying myself to the furniture with my shoelaces. I thought that if I did get the urge to go to the door, it would stop me, so I attached my hand to one leg of the couch. Everyone was in some sort of daze. We all moved around sluggishly, like we were walking in a pool or through molasses. It started getting harder to tell who was where, how long it had been, or what I'd been doing. I started to forget things, too, like what day it was and why I was even there. James, I started to forget my own name. I was even more afraid when that began to happen. I just kept repeating my own name under my breath over and over again for hours. I must have looked like a lunatic. I think I was at that point. The other people were picked off one by one, all of them being absorbed into that goop, until there were only 3 of us left. By then, I was staring into the windows as well. It was beautiful, James. Like heaven is supposed to look. Somehow the black was colorful. I just wanted to stare at it, to become one with it. I nearly didn't notice when the last girl walked over to me and yanked the little girl from my arms. It was so sudden, I didn't even know what to do. I got up and I tried to grab her arm, asking her what she was doing, but she pushed me back. I fell and hit my head on the side of the coffee table, and that's the last I remember. When I woke up, it was daytime. I remember I was still tied to the couch, and the door was wide open, like it had been when I first entered that place. But now I was the only person inside. All 7 of the others were gone, as if they had vanished into thin air. I untied myself from the couch, and I began to make my way over to the door, when I saw something. James, you're not going to believe me when I say this, but there were deep impressions on the floor behind the couch. That girl, the last one, she had tried to drag me and the couch into the door with her, and that poor little girl. I didn't know what else to do, so I ran. I ran as fast as I could, all the way back to my family's cabin. I didn't come out of the cabin for the rest of the trip, and I haven't been back since. Now, I hope you understand why I won't go with you. Again, I'm really sorry, but I just can't. I hope that you'll be safe too. Have fun, and James, don't go getting lost, especially at night. So this happened not too long ago, just about a year ago, I think. My 2 sisters and I never knew this would happen to us. Back around November 2nd, 2019, my sisters and I, let's call them Grace and Sharon, were sitting in our rooms playing an online game. We were at our parents' house, and they treated us like queens, so we liked staying there. Grace's parents heard Sharon's screams of anger and excitement, and so, just like any young child who has spent almost half the day on their cell phones, they told us to go outside, as it was a wonderful day out and all that stuff. Sharon was the first to get up and frown. We didn't want them yelling at us again, so we slowly went outside and just stood there. "Start acting like a 5-year-old, Grace said to Sharon, who was just sitting there in the backyard stairs. "I'm not acting like a 5-year-old, Sharon replied. Right then, as I didn't want them to fight or argue, I asked them if they wanted to go to the woods for a while. Luckily, both Sharon and Grace wanted to come along, but before we left, I told the adults that we were going off into the woods for a while. They said that was fine, so off we went. We started to chat about different animals. Grace was obsessed with dinosaurs, and all the while she kept on blabbering on how cool they were and how she wished they still existed today. We were walking along when Grace then changed the subject to something else. "You guys know about that cabin in the woods?" she asked. "That's pretty cliché to me," I answered. "No, there really is one around here in these woods," Grace retorted. "I'll show you. Just follow me." Sharon and I both followed her to a path through the woods. There were lots of low-hanging branches and leaves scattered all over the forest floor, sticks in random places, and all that. We kept hitting our heads on branches too, but we laughed it off. Then Grace stopped and looked at us. She had this wide smile filled with excitement as she pointed up to the hill that was not too far from where we stood. On that hill was a cabin. It wasn't your typical horror movie cabin, all creepy and worn out, but it was a new one, as if it had been recently built. "So, we're going inside someone's cabin without permission, huh? I see where this is going," Sharon said with a hint of suspicion in her voice. I agreed with her. The place did look like someone's residence. "No," Grace retorted. "I've been there. No one lives there. I promise it's safe." "It's safe," I say. "When people say something's safe, it's never safe." "Are you coming or not?" Grace shouts. She was already halfway up the small, grassy hill. Sharon looked at me, and I looked back at her. With a bit of hesitation, we followed after Grace. By the time we reached the top of the hill, Grace was already on the doorstep. The first thing we all noticed was that the cabin had no front door. The lights were on, though. I'm not sure how we didn't notice that when we were first down the hill, and the place was quiet, unnaturally quiet. Grace went inside and Sharon followed, with me behind. The smell of cut grass soon hit my nose with the force of a semi-truck. "Why does it smell like that?" I asked. "Took the words right out of my mouth," Sharon agreed. Immediately we heard footsteps. Not a person, but more like an animal walking on all fours. I froze. "Guys, we need to leave. Someone's animal is in here." Grace nodded slightly, but apparently she didn't agree with my idea. Instead, she began to explore around the cabin, as if she was looking for something. "Run!" Sharon suddenly shouted and took off out of the cabin. Grace and I then turned around, only to see a massive animal of some kind standing just inches away from the staircase. It was white, impossibly skinny. So skinny, in fact, that it was almost bone. It had these black, sunken-in eyes. It was about 8 feet tall and stood like a person. And it stared at us. "What is that?" I whispered into Grace's ear. Grace didn't answer, and I understood why. We were so terrified by this creature. This white thing then decided to crawl back up the stairs, now seemingly uninterested in us. The way it crawled was more like a spider. Before finally vanishing in the darkness upstairs, it took one last emotionless glance back at us. It stared for only a few seconds, then leapt the last 4 stairs up. Grace grabbed me by the arm and took me outside. Sharon was there waiting for us, mouth agape, staring at the cabin. There was no need for us to speak. We fled away from the cabin, down the hill, through the woods, and finally made it back into the backyard, where the adults stared at us with suspicious eyes. We made it out alive, but confused and traumatized. At the time of writing this, I'm 17. I have 2 younger siblings, a brother Josh and a sister Krista, who are both 14. My mother is a very kind woman, always helping other members of my family when they need it. My father passed away when I was 10. He always had a way of making any situation a good one. Finally, there's Uncle Jesse, my mom's brother. He was living with us at the time because he had lost his arm a year before. This story may sound crazy, but I swear on my life this happened. I even have a scar as a reminder, but I'll explain that along with the story. This happened to me and my family when we were on vacation in the UK. We had been driving to a small town in the UK countryside. The drive was about 5 hours. There were 5 of us in the car, myself, my 2 younger siblings, Mom and Uncle Jesse. My siblings, Josh and Krista, were both asleep at the time. My mom was driving while my uncle and myself were talking about what plans we had when we arrived. We had rented a cottage by a lake for 2 weeks. Eventually, we arrived at the cottage. My mother stepped out of the vehicle and went to wake up Josh and Krista, while Uncle Jesse went to unlock the door. "Mom, I'm going to go take a walk, okay?" I said, climbing out of the car. My mom responded with, "Okay, just don't wander off too far." The cottage was laid out like this. At the front was a deep forest that stretched around until it reached the back of the cottage. Then it opened up to reveal a beautiful lake. If you stood on the shore, you could see other cottages around the lake. I started walking about 20 meters or so into the forest. It didn't take long for me to spot something strange. Claw marks on some of the trees. They looked like they could have been from a bear, except they were about as long as my entire arm, and they wrapped around the whole trunk of the tree, like something had used the tree to pull itself upwards. Then I felt it, a feeling I'll never forget, the feeling that I should run and run fast. I kept walking, and as I did, the feeling kept getting worse and worse until I was about 30 meters in. By then I could not take it anymore, so I ran back out. When I'd gotten back to the cottage, my family had already brought our bags in. The rest of the day went without any problems. We all went to bed, but I soon discovered that night, it would be one night that I wish had never happened. The cottage had 2 bedrooms. My siblings and I were all sleeping in one, my mom in the other, and my Uncle Jesse was sleeping on the couch. It was around 3 a.m., and I was lying in bed, unable to fall asleep. Suddenly I got up because I saw Uncle Jesse leaving the cottage. I got up and ran after him. I caught up to him about halfway to the beach. He told me he was going to sit by the water for a bit, so I joined him. We were sitting by the water together for about half an hour before we decided to head back in. The distance from the shore to the back door was about 150 meters. We had walked about 50 meters when the feeling from before returned stronger than ever. I was guessing Uncle Jesse felt it too, because he told me to speed it up. This is the hardest part for me to tell. When we were about 25 meters from the door, Uncle Jesse broke out into a full-blown sprint. Before I could follow suit, I felt a sharp pain in my back and something pushed me into the ground. I began to hear a rumbling growl. Suddenly there was a pressure on my back, as if something was standing on top of me. I heard screaming coming from the cabin. I raised my head to see my mother, my siblings, and my uncle all standing there with their faces locked in looks of fear, and they were white as snow. I could feel it. Whatever was causing the pressure in my back, it had a scaly texture to it. Then the weight was lifted off of me. I was not able to move until my mom ran over and helped me up. I turned my head to see this massive creature hidden among the tall trees. The only clear part I could see were its large, yellow, lizard-like eyes. Together, my mom and I ran inside. We completely locked the place down, and we didn't leave the cottage for the rest of our vacation. That creature left a scar on my back. I assume it tore into me with its claws. Thanks for listening to my experience. I know how crazy it sounds, but I swear it happened. Please, if you ever enter the UK countryside, be careful. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like these stories, then hit the like button, press the notification bell, and subscribe for more spine-tingling content. And we will see you in the next story.